The rain came down like needles. Tiny, cold, unforgiving needles. And in the middle of a deserted country road, a blind dog took one shaky step. Then another. Beside him, so small she was almost invisible against the wet asphalt. A kitten walked with purpose. She tapped his shoulder. Left, right, left again. She was his eyes. He was her warmth. And together, they were walking 10 miles through a storm to find the only person who had ever loved them. This is their story. Thomas had never felt a pain like it. It wasn't a physical thing. It was deeper. It sat in his chest like a stone. His wife, Elena, had been gone for 3 months now. A sudden stroke, the doctors said. One moment she was laughing in the kitchen. The next, she was on the floor. The world had taken her, and it hadn't asked for permission. The house felt like a museum of memories. Her gardening gloves still sat by the back door, stiff and dry. Her scent was fading from the pillow. Thomas moved through the rooms like a ghost, barely eating, barely sleeping. But he wasn't completely alone. There were 2 souls in that house who grieved just as deeply as he did. Benny was an old golden retriever. His eyes had clouded over with cataracts 2 years ago, turning his world into a permanent, blurry fog. He navigated the house by memory, by the feel of the rug under his paws, by the sound of Elena's voice. When her voice stopped, Benny stopped too. He would lay by her empty chair for hours, his nose twitching, searching the air for a ghost. Thomas would watch him and see his own reflection. 2 old creatures, lost in the dark. Then there was Socks. Socks was a tiny black kitten Elena had rescued from a drainpipe a few months before she passed. She was a fierce little thing, all big ears and sharp claws. She hadn't been in the family long, but she had imprinted on Elena like a shadow. More importantly, in the last few weeks of Elena's life, Socks had developed a strange habit. When Benny would bump into a wall or a chair, Socks would meow loudly, as if to say, "Over here." Elena used to laugh, calling Socks Benny's little seeing eye cat. Thomas thought it was just a coincidence. He had no idea how wrong he was. The day everything changed was a Tuesday. Thomas had a doctor's appointment in the city. It was a heart checkup. A cruel irony. He didn't care if his heart was working. It felt broken anyway. He filled the automatic feeder with enough food for 2 days, gave Benny a sad pat on the head, and walked out the door. Socks watched him from the windowsill, her green eyes unblinking as the car disappeared down the long, dusty driveway. Thomas made it to the clinic. He sat in the sterile white room, listening to the cardiologist mumble words like stress and blood pressure. But he didn't hear them. His mind was on the house. It was on Elena. It was an hour later, as he was paying at the front desk, that his phone buzzed. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Gable. Her voice was high and tight with panic. "Thomas, there's been a fire." The words didn't make sense. A fire? The sky was clear. He had turned off the stove. Mrs. Gable was speaking fast, her words tumbling over each other. A lightning strike. A freak bolt out of a clear blue sky that hit the old oak tree, which crashed through the power line, which sparked on the dry roof. The house was burning. Thomas didn't remember the drive back. He just remembered the smoke. He could see it from miles away, a black pillar staining the horizon. By the time he screeched the car to a halt at the end of the lane, the fire trucks were already there, but it was too late. The house was a skeleton. The roof had collapsed. The kitchen, where Elena used to sing, was gone. Everything was ash and water and the acrid smell of melted plastic. Thomas fell to his knees in the wet grass. The fire chief was talking to him, but the words were muffled, like he was underwater. And then a thought cut through the fog, sharper than any knife. Benny, Socks. He scrambled up, screaming their names. A firefighter grabbed his arm, holding him back from the smoking wreckage. "I'm sorry, sir," the man said, his face grim. "There's nothing alive in there. We did a sweep." Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat in Mrs. Gable's spare bedroom, staring at the floral wallpaper. He had lost Elena. He had lost the house. And now, because he went to a useless doctor's appointment, he had lost the last 2 living pieces of her. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing his lungs. He replayed the firefighter's words over and over. Nothing alive. Benny, blind and confused, would have been trapped. Socks, so small and fragile, wouldn't have stood a chance. He had failed them, but the firefighter was wrong. 20 miles away, as the sun began to set and the rain started to fall, a pair of scorched, trembling animals huddled beneath a bush. When the burning branch had smashed through the living room window, Socks had let out a scream that was pure instinct. She darted to Benny, who was frozen in a corner, whimpering. She bit his ear, hard. It was a signal. Danger. Run. Benny, blind and terrified, had followed the sound of her meows. He trusted that sound. It was the sound of safety. Socks, with the intuition only animals possess, led him to the dog door in the back. The heat was monstrous. The smoke was choking. But Socks didn't stop. She shot through the flap, meowing frantically until the big dog scrambled out behind her, his fur singed, his paws cut on broken glass. They ran into the woods as their world exploded behind them. Now, they were alone in the wilderness. The rain soaked Socks' black fur, making her look impossibly small. Benny was shivering, a deep, bone-rattling shiver. He was thirsty. He was scared. He didn't understand where the floor had gone. But Socks didn't let him stop. She had a map in her head. Not a map of roads or landmarks, but a scent map. A scent she had known since she was a tiny, helpless thing rescued from a drain. The scent of the man. The scent of Thomas. The journey was a 10-mile nightmare. To a human, 10 miles is a hike. To a blind dog and a 3-month-old kitten, it was an expedition across a hostile planet. They crossed a field of sharp, cut corn stalks. Every step for Benny was a stumble. The stalk sliced at his legs. Socks would walk ahead, tapping her paw on the ground, a tiny drumbeat in the vast silence. Benny would follow the tap. Left, right, left, right. If she stopped tapping, he would stop walking, his head hung low, his lungs heaving. She was his only compass. They reached a stream. The water was rushing, loud and dangerous. Benny couldn't see the drop. He could only hear the roar, and it made his legs lock up in fear. Socks rubbed her tiny body against his wet chest, a purr rumbling deep in her throat. It was a vibration, a sensation that cut through the fear. She wasn't just guiding him, she was comforting him. She walked to the edge, found the shallowest point, and meowed back at him. Benny, trusting the thread that connected them, stepped into the icy water. The current pulled at his heavy fur, but Socks stayed right at the edge, her meows a lifeline pulling him to the other side. Night fell. The darkness meant nothing to Benny. His world was always dark, but the cold was dangerous. Socks found a hollow log. She squeezed in, then meowed until Benny followed. His big body barely fitting. They curled up together, a pile of wet fur. Socks buried her face in the warm crook of his neck. For a few hours, in the pitch black, they were safe. They were each other's universe. But the night was not silent. The forest had eyes. An owl screeched. Twigs snapped. Benny whimpered in his sleep, dreaming of fire. Socks didn't sleep. Her eyes were wide, scanning the dark, her ears swiveling at every sound. She was the night watch. She was the protector. And the next morning, as the gray dawn broke, she nudged Benny awake. They had to move. The scent trail was fading. They reached the highway. It was the most dangerous part of the journey. The roar of the cars was 10 times worse than the stream. It was a wall of terrifying, unnatural sound. Benny tried to bolt back into the bushes. He was panicking, turning in circles, but Socks wouldn't let him. She stood her ground on the gravel shoulder, screaming her tiny meows over the roar of a passing truck. She was telling him, wait. She was calculating, a gap in the traffic. Silence. Then, a frantic, urgent meow. Go. Now. They dashed across the asphalt, a blur of gold and black. A car horn blared. Tires screeched. But they made it. They were 9 miles closer to home. Back at the ruins, Thomas was a shell. Mrs. Gable had brought him tea, but he hadn't touched it. He walked out to the driveway, his boots crunching on the blackened debris. He just wanted to be close to them. He looked at the woods, his eyes hollow. I'm sorry, Elena, he whispered to the gray sky. I couldn't protect them. Suddenly, A flock of birds burst from the treetops, scattering into the air. Something was moving at the edge of the tree line. Thomas squinted, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. He saw it, a tiny dark shape, limping out of the tall grass. It was soaked, covered in mud, barely able to stand. It was Socks. Thomas felt the air leave his lungs. "Socks?" he choked out, his voice a broken rasp. The kitten took 2 wobbly steps toward him, then stopped. She looked back. She meowed. And out of the shadows of the forest, guided by the sound he trusted most in the world, came Benny. The old dog's tail was wagging. Just a little, just enough. Thomas fell to his knees in the wet, muddy lane. The tears came, hot and uncontrollable, washing clean tracks through the soot on his face. He didn't run to them. He couldn't. His legs were gone. He just opened his arms. Socks let out a final exhausted squeak and collapsed into his palm. A second later, Benny's wet nose was buried in Thomas's chest, his whole body trembling with relief. Thomas held them, right there in the middle of the road, rocking back and forth. He was crying and laughing, a wild, crazy sound that came from the deepest part of his soul. He had lost everything. But the universe, in its strange, silent way, had just given him back the only thing that mattered: hope. Benny didn't just walk 10 miles. Socks didn't just guide him. They had carried Elena's love all the way back to him. A love that refused to burn, a love that refused to die. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to Dog and Cat Universe Hub. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a miracle. And share this with someone who needs to believe that even in the darkest storm, love always finds a way home.